So it's just past 10 GMT, and we start this news hour in the occupied West Bank, where Israeli forces in the past few hours have carried out yet another raid. This time it's in Nablus, where 2 Palestinian men in their 30s have been killed. 3 others were wounded. This follows a major Israeli assault on the Jenin refugee camp earlier this week, which killed 12 Palestinians and displaced thousands. It also caused extensive damage to homes and critical facilities there. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, says that the crackdown will continue. The 2 Palestinians killed on Friday were reportedly wanted for an attack earlier this week. Tension in the region is high. At least 197 Palestinians have been killed, including 32 minors this year alone. Let's speak now to Alan Fisher, who is in Ramallah. Alan, bring us up to speed, first of all, on what exactly happened.
Well, it was just before dawn. There was a convoy of Israeli vehicles that moved in through 3 different intersections into the old town. The locals reported that it was like a mini invasion. There were so many vehicles. They were actually after 2 men that the Israelis believe were connected to a shooting on a Samaritan community earlier this week. Now, it appears that both men were in the house that they had been targeted in Nablus, and they asked the both men to come out. Now, they were met, it's been reported, with gunfire and also with improvised explosive devices, IEDs. At that point, the Israelis called up more reinforcements and peppered the house with gunfire, and we've seen some of the pictures on social media, and you can see that there was quite a lot of ammunition fired towards where the 2 men were staying. It turns out that during the incident, both men were killed. Now, they've been identified as Hamza Maqbool and Khairi Shaheen, both members of the PFLP, which is the the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and that's been confirmed just shortly now. The army started to withdraw. There were a number of skirmishes, and 3 other people were hurt, were wounded. They're in hospital. Their conditions regarded as not serious, and there were 3 arrests, and 2 of them are related to Maqbool. So clearly people there were very upset by what happened this morning. But what's happened in the last couple of hours is that the Israeli army have now pulled out of the area.
And what's happened just over the last few days matters as well. Give us the recent context, Alan. There's no denying there's been a sharp uptick in violence since the Israeli raid on Jenin earlier this week.
Well, of course, that was a 48-hour operation which killed 12 Palestinians, injured hundreds more, wounded hundreds more, and more than 20 people were critically wounded in that operation. And a number of armed Palestinian groups said at the time that they would respond to what the Israelis had done. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, said they would continue to seek out what he described as terrorists and stop what he said was their terrorist operations. And so you're going to see operations of this kind by the Israelis. You're going to see reaction from and a response from the Palestinians. And you'll know that if you set aside the incident in Tel Aviv earlier this week, where 1 Palestinian was killed after driving his vehicle at Israeli pedestrians, there was also a shooting incident near a settlement, an illegal settlement on the West Bank on Thursday. 1 man killed a soldier, wounded another, and was shot dead by Israeli patrols. There have been a number of shooting incidents reported. Security across the occupied West Bank is incredibly high, but there seems to be no end for the time being in this continuing cycle that we've seen really since what happened in Hebron at the beginning of the week.
Absolutely.
Jenin,
Alan Fisher reporting there from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Thank you, Alan. Let's talk now to Hassan Ayub. He is professor of political science at Al-Najah University. You're joining us from Nablus today. Your reaction to this latest raid on Nablus?
Well, this raid comes at the heels of the Israeli military campaign in Jenin refugee camp and the city of Jenin, where Israeli reprisal hit a new peak against Palestinians. And if you want to put all of this into perspective and the context, Israeli military operations and reprisal actions against Palestinians have been skyrocketing in the last 2 months. Your report just indicated that up until now, almost 200 Palestinians were killed by Israeli troops and intelligence forces since the beginning of the year. Another thing that helps us to understand what is going on is to notice that almost every Palestinian military action in the last 2 years, at least, came after and as a response to Israeli different operations. This is what the record says so far. And it indicates, anyways, the ability of Palestinians to introduce what I can call an alternative, an opposite direction of the politics of negotiations that did not bring Palestinians anywhere for more than 30 years now. So in this atmosphere of political vacuum, and if we take into consideration Israeli campaigns for more than 3 years now, including settlers organized terror attacks against Palestinians, like the one that took place in Hawara or in Tormus Hayya, and we can register more than 88 settler attacks against Palestinians only in the last month.
Okay.
So what is going on is...
Professor, I want to jump in because just before you carry on, I want to jump in because I want to make very sure I understand what you're saying. You said the Palestinians are introducing an alternative to the policy of negotiations. You're saying that Palestinians are increasingly choosing violence over non-existent negotiations. Is that right?
Well, first of all, I don't call it violence. Every single international law and covenant give the Palestinians the right to resist and to defend their very existence, their national rights, their freedom, their liberty. So I think it's very mistaken to call it violence.
Okay.
It's a reaction against Israeli violence that's been taking place against Palestinians not only day in, day out, since 1948. Actually,
so let me perhaps rephrase it. Your point earlier then...
Just a second, please.
Go ahead.
Just a second, please. If you take a look to what happened in refugee camp Jenin, the displacement, the destruction of infrastructure, the killing of children, and the horror that Israeli troops deliberately inflicted upon Palestinians. Those are Palestinians who were displaced in the first place. They were expelled in 1948. Then they were followed by Israel in 1967. And now, they're being attacked in their refugee camps. So the whole story is a story about Palestinians came to understand that there is no way for them to prevent another expulsion, to prevent another Nakba against them, but to take to arms, to take to the streets, and to take to different kinds of resistance, whatever kind of resistance is in their disposal that they have to use. This is the issue today.
So, and I insist on this point because I just think it's very interesting in your analysis that you're saying the needle on the Palestinian side is now pointing more firmly towards armed resistance than it has in the recent past.
Yes, actually, this was sort of a consistency before 2021 when we witnessed at the time the campaigns of knife attacks and what is called lone wolf Palestinian attacks. But it was developed in 2021 into a mini uprising that included all Palestinians in the occupied territories and inside Israel proper, including Gaza Strip. Now, Israel's strategy, politically speaking, to impose the deal of the century by de facto and de jure through this new government, there is no other way to challenge that but to inflict heavy price on Israelis. What is going on is that Israeli settlers and Israeli far-right and religious right fascist forces are demanding a complete and final destruction of Palestinian resistance so they can carry on their project to
so I think you meant I think you meant the Israelis want to inflict a heavy price on Palestinians then.
Well, that's one thing, but the other thing is that Israel is trying to inflict as much pressure as possible on Palestinians to prevent them from developing any meaningful resistance means to Israeli strategy. This is what's going on. Without
Understood.
such a thing, the ability of Israel to impose annexation would be questionable, because the ability of Palestinians to wage resistance in Nablus, in Jenin, military resistance like in Haili a couple of weeks ago, including Aqbat Jabal refugee camp and elsewhere, it is developing and it's consistent, and it applies different tactics of guerrilla warfare, which is, I think, the first time in modern Palestinian history that we can witness such a phenomenon.
Hassan Ayub, Professor of Political Science at Al Najah University, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.